I am Cheatle, and I represent the Empyrean Order. And I'll be doing a class today on the history, geography, as well as the lore of the River Kingdoms and the surrounding areas. Pino, are you already... Okay, cool. So just to start out with, let me go ahead and give everybody a map of Golarion. There you go. Now, if you all open up this map, there is two continents, the northern continent and the southern continent. The northern continent is called Avistian, and in the northeast, you'll see the River Kingdoms. You can zoom in on the map a little bit. The River Kingdoms, as you can see, are very aptly named. There's massive amounts of rivers and streams and tributaries that are all just going all through the area. And we are located in the northwestern part of the River Kingdoms. As a matter of fact, we are right there on the border of Numeria and Ustalav. And Razmaran is very close by to the southwest. Now, the River Kingdoms are extremely chaotic place to be. They're made up of many small settlements, cities, nation states within the nation itself. And together, they actually make up the nation of the River Kingdoms through the Outlaw Council, which meets once every year. And the Outlaw Council, basically, everyone comes together, all the leaders of all the main settlements, and they create some lasting, well, I shouldn't say laws, because it's not quite the right word. They make agreements. They also come together so that they can bring their forces together in case any invasion or incursion from any foreign entity happens to make its way into the River Kingdoms. And essentially, it's a show of force. They also make all kinds of agreements in terms of trade. And one of the things about the River Kingdoms is that it's very hard to farm. It's very hard to raise crops, cattle, because it's so chaotic and so much banditry happens on a daily basis in the River Kingdoms. It's an extremely dangerous place to live in. And sort of the crown jewel of the River Kingdoms is Daggermark. Daggermark is a settlement that is where the Outlaw Council meets, as well as an extremely powerful force within the River Kingdoms. And it's even somewhat of a powerful force within the general area. They have an Assassin's Guild who takes contracts from all over the River Kingdoms, as well as most of the northern continent. And because of this power that they hold, they actually are able to stave off most attacks on their sovereignty. And it's a very interesting setup they have between the Assassin's Guild and the Poisoner's Guild. And so they help to bring stability to an area that is extremely chaotic in nature. So the new Daggermark, sorry, is basically sort of the neutral ground in the River Kingdoms, because it's one of the few places it's one of the few places of stability. And that's why the Outlaw Council meets there. They consider it neutral grounds. And it goes back to one of the 6 river freedoms, which we'll get to in a second. Now, talking about a little bit about the geography of the area, the River Kingdoms, the Selin River goes right through the River Kingdoms. And this allows for the area to facilitate large amounts of travel, trade, and also a lot of banditry in general. There are pirates that go through the rivers. There are huge merchant fleets that go through the rivers. Everybody from around the world actually goes up the Selin because it leads into Mendev, which is a country north of the River Kingdoms. And there is some huge, almost apocalyptic situation going on there called the World Wound. Yep, exactly, Aruga. The Mendevian Crusades, yes. Currently, there is an apocalyptic battle going on in the north. A giant wound, essentially, in the planet opened up to the depths of the demonic realms. And these demons emerged and began to destroy everything around them. And so in Mendev, which is like the last bastion of hope in the area, the Crusades began there. And knights and various other organizations from around the planet sent their warriors there to help stave off the demons. Yep, the Church of Almade is a big supporter of the Mendevian Crusades. And because of this travel from all over the world into Mendev, a lot of people come through the River Kingdoms. And one of those places that are highly traveled is the Crusader Road, which goes right through the current area of Pathfinder Online. And this is one of the reasons why the area is so populated. This is a high travel area. People are moving up to Fort Inevitable and moving up the Crusader Road to the Fort Riverwatch. And then from there, they move through into Numeria and up to Mendev. So it brings a lot of trade, as well as some stability in the form of Fort Inevitable, which I'll get to in a second. Now, one of the qualities of the River Kingdoms is that there is not only a lot of croplands, but there's forests, swamps, and there's even mountainous areas. It's in a temperate climate, and it has a lot of various different types of geography and a lot of just a lot of raw resources. Now, one of the things about the River Kingdoms is the sort of the nature of invasion. They're always threatened to be invaded from the various different countries around the River Kingdoms. A lot of groups believe that the River Kingdoms themselves are easy pickings. Well, like I said earlier about the Outlaw Council, is that they come together in times of need and show a show of force. But places like Galt, Numeria, Razmaran make claims into the River Kingdoms due to this inherent chaos and disorganization that they see. And most of the time, they do not succeed in moving into the River Kingdoms because these outlaw kings will, in fact, come together and force them out. And so it's kind of a back and forth situation that just adds to the chaos. Now, let's talk a little bit about the 6 river freedoms. Each one of these I'll post into the chat box here. These 6 river freedoms are what every single major settlement in the River Kingdoms adheres to. Some more than others. They adhere to all of them. Some of the settlements are sort of based around some of these freedoms. The first is, say what you will, I live free, which is basically free speech. And as you can see here, this does not alleviate you from the consequences of what you say. It's just that the River Kingdoms believe in free speech. Now, the next is one that I'm sure you've seen on the forums a lot. Oathbreakers must die. In a land where chaos is abound and banditry is prevalent, trusting people can be a precarious situation. And adhering to this Oathbreakers must die allows for this inherent chaos to be tamed somewhat, in that people do try to keep their word. People do try to keep their agreements. And I would go as far as say that it's more than try, they do. And when you don't keep your agreements in a land like this, people notice and people react to that. The third is walk any road, float any river. It's essentially the freedom to travel and not have any of the major lords block your land or water travel or charge tolls for passing. The inherent freedom of the River Kingdoms leads to this being one that's actually maintained quite vigorously. And one of the gods that is native to the River Kingdoms, Hanspur, his followers actually are adherents of this particular rule much more than the others. And if you also notice, we have an escalation called Float Any River. And these are actually a cult of Hanspur. They're called the River Shepherds, and they will enforce this law by any means necessary. So that's one of the reasons why they come into the River Kingdom, when they come into our area and fight us, is because of this rule that they believe in wholeheartedly. Next on the list here is Courts are for Kings. Yes, there we go. What was your question about number 3? Well, if you notice, most of the various factions that have claimed land do not require tolls in their territory. They also allow anybody to move around freely. The well, all but maybe one of the factions or governments, or however you want to say it. The laws about farming has absolutely nothing to do with that particular law number 3 there. So, for instance, the EBA, the Emerald Lodge, and the Aeonian League, as well as Osm's Vigil, all have basically saying you can come and travel through our lands freely. So as you can see, all these groups adhere to that particular rule. And just like any of the other nations within the River Kingdoms, like Daggermark or Mivin or Pittix, all of these groups also claim territory, but they're basically just claiming territory for those resources and not necessarily to prevent anybody from moving from location to location. The River Freedoms number 4 is Courts for Kings. And this essentially says that when you are in someone's sovereign territory, you obey their laws. And this actually creates a situation where the rulers of the various city-states will either have negotiations on either side of their borders or in a neutral city that is usually Daggermark during the Outlaw Council that happens every year. That this law is actually adhered to quite closely in the River Kingdoms, and you will see actual groups of people walking along the borders just to make sure they don't step into somebody else's territory. So it's interesting. Now on to number 5. Slavery is an abomination. This is one of the strongest of all of the River Freedoms. Every year, you will see thousands of escaped refugees and slaves from other tyrannical places in the world end up right here in the River Kingdoms. Over a third of the river folk are actually slaves in the River Kingdoms. And that has led to this being probably the most enforced of all of the River Freedoms because of that. There are several settlements that go out of their way to stop slavery and will even plunge into other countries to stop slavery. So it's an extremely important part of the River Kingdoms. Freedom is very important here. Now, the last one that you've probably all seen, you have what you hold. And like it says there, it draws a heavy distinction between robbery and mere stealing. Taking something by force is considered acceptable and even respectable. And the difference comes down to allowing a would-be victim the ability to resist and an opportunity to face his or her robber and plan for repossession if their skill is lacking or luck is on vacation. It's very important. Maybe not the most important, since, but it's definitely one that's quoted the most. So banditry is very big and even a respectable profession here in the River Kingdoms. And stabbing somebody in the back and taking what they have is actually considered dishonorable. Approaching somebody, such as stand and deliver, is very honorable. And there are entire cultures within the River Kingdoms that base their laws around stand and deliver in the honor amongst thieves, so to speak. So it's quite an interesting place to live in. Now, before I move on to the second part of my discussion about the areas around the River Kingdoms, does anyone have any questions about what I've talked about thus far? Any questions at all? Oh, we have one right here. Do laws 4 and 3 come into conflict? So for everybody listening, that is walking your road, floating your river, and courts are for kings. And from what I can tell, in terms of the history of the River Kingdoms, I would have to say that there are cases in which those laws have conflicted. And there is a settlement called Pittix. And it has, well, I don't want to spoil anything. So I'll actually let me take a back step from that, because that's getting into some stuff from a module. Let me think about that for a second. There are a couple of cases where several different settlements across River Kingdoms have fought each other and have blocked each other from crossing. But I think what happens there most of the time is that those laws come into conflict with each other when actual settlements and kingdoms come into conflict with each other. Then everything sort of goes out the window, so to speak. So those are the main scenarios in which I've seen those two particular laws conflict with each other. Okay, any more questions written, or you can ask them? Okay, I'm going to move on to my next section, which is the areas, a brief description of the areas, countries around the River Kingdoms. I'm going to focus on Ustalav, Numeria, and Razmir a bit, because those are the closest countries to our current location. No, I'm not really going to focus on Brevoy. It's kind of on the other side of the River Kingdoms, and right now there's nothing in game that really is connected to Brevoy right now. But I'll go ahead and list off the various countries that are bordered on the River Kingdom. We have Galt to the southeast. We have Brevoy to the northeast. We have Kaonian to the south. Razmaran to the west. Ustalav to the northwest. And Numeria to the north. I want to focus on Numeria, Ustalav, and Razmaran because these places are the closest to our current location, as well as each one of them has some relation to escalations. Although Numeria, not as much, but they will in the future. Now let's start off with Razmaran, okay? Razmaran is a very strange place. It's an entire country that is based upon a cult. Razmir, who is an extremely powerful human, has convinced these various populations into believing that he's actually a god. And he does indeed have power, and to any normal folk, seeing his power demonstrated would in fact makes you think he is a god. One of those feats was he destroyed an entire settlement by himself here in the River Kingdoms. And that has led many to join his ranks. As a matter of fact, Razmaran actually used to be part of the River Kingdoms before it basically became its own country. As you all know, there are escalations. The Razmirian cultists. Now, the problem with the Razmirian cultists and the problem that they have here in the River Kingdoms is that they're very forceful. And they quote unquote invite river folk to worship their living god, but really what they do is it's almost like pushing you into servitude of that particular individual. And so because of their forcefulness and because it seems like servitude, their cult hasn't really spread too far into the River Kingdoms. But when Razmir demonstrates his power, that in and of itself causes quite a lot to join his cause. So the Razmirian cultists, they're here just to take us away, basically. And, you know, it's important that they are fought off because they basically go against the river freedoms quite often. And believing in a living god and that particular cult is just not something that the free folk really want to participate in. Now, on to Ustalav. Ustalav used to be, hundreds and hundreds of years ago, sort of a beautiful kingdom led by the Ustalav royal line. They spent decades bringing the entire country together and creating just this, you know, beautiful culture. Unbeknownst to them, the Whispering Tyrant, which is an undead Lich King, was housed underneath their country. And over the course of 500 years, this Lich King drew in all of his forces to eventually take over Ustalav. And he created this massive undead army out of all of the people that died over the past 500 years in Ustalav. And in conjunction with the orc army of Belkaraz, I believe that's the way you pronounce it, he completely took over the country. And the Taldarian Knights, along with Ozums and the last of the Ustalavian royal line, were able to defeat the Whispering Tyrant and bring peace back to Ustalav. But Ustalav is still working on fixing everything that went wrong over the past 600 years. And one of those things is that there's quite a lot of undead still living there in Ustalav. And even there are even rumors that some of the rulers have been undead. And so there's just this whole cloud of this shadow nature across Ustalav that is still there. And with the upheaval of going back and forth between these two dynasties, there is a lot of counties within Ustalav that have lost land, and some of their nobles have been disposed, and so on and so forth. One of those nobles is Tarina Olislova, and she actually is leading a Ustalavian invasion into the River Kingdoms across the river, because she's trying to claim new lands for herself as well as Ustalav. She's trying to create an entire county out of the border, so that she can regain some of her former power. And she has quite a huge following of Ustalavian knights. And so that's the reason why they're here. That's the reason why they're making an incursion into the River Kingdoms. And she is determined to plant her flag here. Now, moving on to Numeria. Numeria is quite the interesting place. And I'm going to sort of break the role-playing here a little bit to explain a couple of things that are going on in Numeria that is important in the general understanding of Numeria. First of all, Numeria was basically, over the last couple thousand years, ruled by barbarian tribes. And recently, at the heart of this, some civilization has sprung up, so to speak. Some more civilized culture has sprung up over the last several decades. And at the heart of that is the Technic League that sort of control the current leader, the current barbarian leader of Numeria. And they have corrupted him into taking his aspirations from making Numeria a huge country into keeping it the way it is currently. And the reason for that is Silvermount. Silvermount and Starfall are two places in Numeria, Starfall being the capital of Numeria, where a large spaceship landed. Now, I know this is a fantasy game, but currently speaking, there are quite a lot of other civilizations in the Pathfinder universe. And one of those civilizations had a apocalyptic event take place on their planet. And they created an ark, 4 of them, to go spread their civilization amongst the stars. And one of those ark ships, as well as a convoy, during the Age of Darkness, collided into Numeria, basically came down there. And so Silvermount is actually the ark, the ship itself, called, I believe it's called Divinity, the name of the ship. inside were all kinds of specimens of various different species and flora and fauna, everything. Exactly, yes. And so some of that has spread throughout Numeria. Some of it has actually corrupted Numeria. Numeria can be a desolate place in some areas and extremely vibrant as far as plant life in other areas. The ship also brought automatons and androids. And so there's several types of robots, so to speak, that infect the Numerian landscape. And some of these are extremely deadly. And they have talked about, the developers have talked about having some of these as escalations that push into the northern part of our map. And there's annihilators. Yes, seriously. Yes, some of these are very much going to be escalations in the future. There is the annihilators, which are giant scorpion robots with lasers for tails. And they're extremely deadly and they're extremely large. They've wiped out entire settlements in Numeria by themselves. There is the Gearmen, which kind of look like armored knights with weird proportioned bodies. No. Sharks are later beings. No. And these guys are actually what back up the army of the Technic League as well as the Numerian forces. They have thousands of these things, and this is sort of what cements their power in Numeria. And then there's the androids, and the androids are they're not sure where they come from exactly, but basically they are very human-like, and they cannot reproduce, but they can mimic some human emotions. But they have tattoos across their body that actually look like what we would call circuitry, and they have been spawning for the last couple of decades. No one knows why or exactly where they come from, but they have begun to actually equate to a large portion of the population in Numeria. So Numeria is very interesting in that it's a clash of themes of magic and barbarism and technology all wrapped into one civilization. And because of the crash that happened there, it actually affects us on a couple of different levels. One, all the crater hexes that you see around are directly from the crash that happened thousands of years ago. And it spread sky metal. There's three types of sky metal that will be used, I believe, in this game, which is the silvered sky metal, the meteoric ore, and the adamantine ore. There's one other sky metal called, I believe it's Norquel or Norcal. I don't know if they'll eventually use that or not, but that's the most precious of all the sky metals. And basically, they're pieces of the ships that blew apart. And every crater hex is probably some small vessel that crash land, which is kind of interesting. Now, the other reason that Numeria has some great interest to us as well is the Emerald Spire. They did not create the Emerald Spire, but the current leader of the Emerald Spire was actually part of the Technic League. and has ties to Numeria. Now, that leads me into my next subject, which I'll talk about in a bit, which is the Emerald Spire. But first, does anybody have any questions about these various places and how they relate to the River Kingdoms? Okay. No questions? I'll move on to the Emerald Spire. Emerald Spire is very interesting and requires quite a bit of backstory that I'm not going to get into in this current session. But basically, the Emerald Spire is a holdover artifact from before the Age of Darkness, when Thassalon and Aslanti empires ruled most of the planet. And during that time period, the Aslanti were at war with the Aboleth. And one of the Vault Keepers, which I will not explain quite exactly what that is in this session, used one of their vault seeds very, very far below the planet to create a chamber in which to battle the Aboleth. And they did not realize the consequences of their actions of where they planted that seed at. And it created a massive crystallization and killed many people and many things under in the Darklands. And during that time, it shot towards the sky, creating the Emerald Spire. Now, over the millennia, various Durgar, Darrow, Drow, elementals, goblins, monstrous humanoids, so on and so forth, have inhabited the various levels of the Emerald Spire. No one quite knows for sure how many levels there are, but each one is extremely dangerous. There's been many wars over the Spire for the past 1,000 years or so. And each one has long-lasting effects in the area. Now, the Emerald Spire itself, being an Aslanti artifact, has brought the attention of the Mordant Spire elves to our land. And the Mordant Spire elves deem themselves the successor of everything Aslanti. The elves, prior to the Age of Darkness, inhabited Chionium, which is the country to the south. And they fled this world for a different world under the prophecies of the Mordant Spire. The Mordant Spire elves left some elves behind as sort of sentinels to look after everything during the Age of Darkness, but they left as well with the other elven races. And when they got back, their first priority was to go and find everything that the Aslanti left behind and take for themselves, because they were actually, in fact, at war with the Aslanti. And they believe that everything Aslanti is theirs, and thus they believe that the Mordant Spire is theirs, and they have come here with various archaeological teams to bring back all the artifacts from the Mordant Spire, or rather from the Emerald Spire to Mordant Spire, which is an island off the western coast of Avistian. So they're extremely hostile to anybody in the area. And they, in fact, believe that the Emerald Spire itself, as well as all land around it, and any artifacts and the land around those artifacts are theirs. And that's excuse me. Sorry about that. They believe that it is all theirs, and that's the reason why they have sort of invaded our area. And so it's kind of interesting, their reasons behind coming to the area and wanting everything to do with Aslanti. But I'm not going to completely go into that right now. There's a lot more next week that I'll talk about, like Earthfall and the Star Shard, I believe it's called. I can't remember the name off the top of my head at the moment. But I'll talk more about the Starstone. Yes, correct. Yeah. I'll talk more about that next week, as well as more about some of the gods. But does anybody have any questions about what I've gone over so far? Okay. If there's no questions, I'm pretty much finished.
I have a question, not exactly about the lore, but I like the rich lore. And do you have any ideas of how the developers are going to ensure that lore is an integral part of the game, as opposed to, I have a fear that, as the game grows in popularity, that people are not going to care. There's a bunch of sandboxers going to come in, and it's always going to be, the traditional sandbox crowd not caring about the this lore. So what do you think the developers are doing to ensure that the lore becomes a major part of the game?
There's a couple of things that they've done and that they're currently doing. First of all, anything that gets put into the game has to be signed off by Paizo. And for those listening, Paizo is the IP holder of Golarion, the world in which Pathfinder Online is set in. So every little thing, like the tabards and the way the armor looks and the artwork and all these little sheets of paper that we get with lore pieces on it, everything like that has to be written off by Paizo, and they ensure the integrity of the IP in the game. Now, the developers are also taking a lot of influence from various different types of modules, because they really do want the world to be rich in Golarion lore. And that is going to be eventually one of their focuses. And they've been, little by little putting more lore into the game, as well as tying mechanics to that as well, where you see the gods and domains. But I think what it comes down to is they're just trying to keep the integrity of the IP within the game. And when it comes to it being a sandbox, I think what we'll see. Sorry, one second. I think what we'll see is more things like the Fanes and more things that don't necessarily have like a theme park style quest line to get to, but they'll be populating the world with these various bits of lore and various important deities and so on. And the escalations themselves, like I just went over, the Mordic Spire, the Ustalavians, the Shepherds, all of these are rooted in the lore of Golarion. Now, I think there can be a question about how they want to make this sort of a bigger part of the game, like sort of allow for it to be more obvious that this is the lore of the game and the flavor. Because right now, really, the stories that are being told are from our perspective, and a lot of that lacks some of the lore. I don't know exactly.
Yeah, I mean, my opinion is that the players aren't lore. The environment is lore, and like you said, the settlements, the land that you ran into, and more importantly, the NPCs that you run into is what gives you that lore. And I really like what they've done with the escalations. I hope that they do a lot more of that, so that it feels like it's those NPCs that kind of own the land, and we're just contributing to it. So that we're living within that world.
I think one of the things that they can do, where in the River Kingdom is the PFO map? The PFO map is located at the most farthest northern and western part of the River Kingdoms, and the larger map that was published during the Land Rush is the northern part of that map, the border with Numeria. Fort River Watch is right there on the border. So we're right here in the northwest of the River Kingdoms. And they did that because it allows for us to create incursions into Numeria, create incursions into Ustalav, which are very, very rich, and allow us to expand the map more to the south and the east into the actual River Kingdoms. I know they're going to expand the map to the north and the west to begin with, because that finishes out up to the border. But eventually in the future, we'll see a lot of expansion to the south and east, because that's where the actual River Kingdoms are located. And we're just right there on the tip of them. Now, something interesting to note is that Fort Inevitable and Thornkeep are exactly 6 miles apart. So you can sort of derive from that how big of an area that we're actually playing in. Kind of gives you a pretty good idea of this particular map. Now, speaking of Fort Inevitable and Thornkeep, I was going to talk more about this at a later date, because not everything has been set in stone with these settlements. But just to give you a little bit of background, Fort Inevitable is a settlement that. Sure thing, Kudar. Fort Inevitable is a settlement that is set in as a lawful evil settlement that is supported by the Hell Knights of Cheliax. And they, I believe, are the Order of the Pike. And they definitely condone slavery. So almost everything they're about conflicts with the River Freedoms. But they allow for some stability in the area, and thus have created a pretty big settlement there with Fort Inevitable. And their main thing is they're just supposedly clearing the area of monsters for the Crusaders that are moving from the southern part of Avistan up to the Worldwind. And then there's Thornkeep, and Thornkeep is just this sort of lawless, frontier settlement that is built atop an area of Aslanti artifacts. There are various dungeons underneath Thornkeep, and actually Zog. You all have heard Zog. That's supposed to be the test server. Zog was actually a kingdom of goblins for hundreds of years in this area, and they actually infest the top parts of the Emerald Spire, as well as the dungeons below Thornkeep and the areas around Thornkeep. So it's all kind of interesting and all tied together. It's just that it's not right there in your face. And so that's one of the things that they haven't really done, is they haven't really put a lot of this lore in your face to really understand how it's all sprinkled in here. So the goblins, I believe one of the escalations are one of the escalations. I believe what is it called? The Ripping Chains. I believe the Ripping Chains goblins are a. Yep. There are several different clans that are actually attacking. That are related to Zog, the clans that are descendants of the Empire of Zog, and so you can see them in the Ripping Chains and a couple other places around the map. Now, talking about escalations, there's also the Moloch cultists, and tying that in with the lore, Moloch is one of the, I believe, the leader of the 6th level of Hell, and he is always looking for mercenaries and always looking to recruit to his army on the material plane and and out in the outer planes as well. And so the Moloch cultists are sort of a forward mercenary army that is plaguing the material plane. So that is very, very heavily tied to the lore. But again, it's one of those things that we don't actually really understand or see. Some of the strips of paper that you all get have some of this information on it, and some of the quests themselves talk about it a little bit. But again, it's not right there. We don't. I think maybe it's because there's a lack of theme park elements in the game, that we don't really get to see this lore too much. That may or may not change in the future, but hopefully we do get something that sort of sets up the area and talks more about to new players about the lore and the history, because it's very rich. It is indeed very rich, and it would be quite awesome for some of these people to come in and be able to role play within that framework of the IP. And I know a lot of people that were Kickstarters, they love the lore, and I know some people who role play within that lore. If you look at the Seventh Veil, they have the Echo Woodsman, and that group is very much a group that role plays within the lore of the IP. And Aussie Dwarf, you're in here. The Forge Home, you guys are role playing heavily within the IP as well, right? Oh, Aussie might be AFK. Oh no, there he is. Yeah, off the 5 kingdoms. And your goals are to kind of find your ancient city in the River Kingdoms and revive it, correct?
That would be correct. We're trying to find the place called Rookwarden. Rookwarden used to be a dwarven settlement that was known for its excellent marble, and so our goals are to eventually reclaim that area.
So there are groups in this game that are playing within the IP, and so it's very interesting, and it's very cool that we have groups that are doing that, and we have and that we have this much just raw lore and material and history to pull from when playing this game. So, and that's kind of what I wanted to highlight here with these classes. And I'm going to try and do at least one class a week on Saturdays, sort of highlight that lore more and more, because there's so much material. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and end the class. And I thank you all for attending. Again, I am Cheatle, and I represent the Empyrean Order, which is housed in Brighthaven. And I thank you all for listening in. And Pino, I believe that's it.